Hello, friends, and welcome to Coached by Tara, the podcast where Tara
Hi, that's me.
explains things to me. Hi, I'm Mike. Like book stuff, usually. She coaches me, basically. And right now we are on New Moon.
New Moon.
New Moon, which is a book in the Twilight series by Stephanie Meyer. Last episode.
I don't know why I'm can't stop laughing this morning.
Sorry we missed a few weeks there, guys. Life got in the way. Tara had her birthday. Tara is 29 years old now.
I'm 29.
And she will be 29 for the next 10 years.
Probably.
So congratulations to her and happy birthday. Everybody tell her happy birthday. You guys already did, actually, in the Discord. You guys are super nice.
Yeah, we always have a lot going on lately. I don't know what's going on.
But we're gonna we're here on a Sunday morning. Tara had her Sunday morning Baja Blast. She's blasted off.
I am blasting off currently.
And we're gonna get moving here. Last episode we covered the end, chapter 3 of New Moon.
Mm-hmm.
The end. And my recap of that is that
it was horrible.
It was horrible.
It was horrible.
I don't know why we're doing Billy on the street. It was horrible.
Yeah.
I hated it. But basically, Edward broke up with Bella, and then she kind of wandered the woods like a freak and passed out. And Billy, not Billy. Who's Billy?
Billy
Black.
The street.
Billy Black
Oh.
wasn't there. That's just the name I said. Her dad and everybody went on a search party for her, and they finally found her. But there was some weird animal noises before they found her, so I think one of
How do you know that?
I'm guessing.
What if other viewers don't know things like that?
Okay, redacted what I just said, but I think something weird's going on because there were some animal noises, and then someone found her. And then we found out that the Quaaludes, the Quaalude tribe, were having a big bonfire because they were excited that the Cullens had left the area.
Wait, why did I just have what is it called when you have an intruding thought? Intrusive. To go like this.
Tara just wanted me to know she had an intrusive thought to just headbutt her microphone as hard as possible.
Just happens.
That is definitely an intrusive thought. But basically that was the whole chapter. It was just describing how sad Bella was and how she felt numb, and then we found out at the end that it passed, what was it, 3 months?
Yeah, so it goes October, November, December, January, 4 months.
So we're picking up in January with this next chapter, which is called what, Tara?
Chapter 4, Waking Up.
Waking Up. So my prediction is that Bella wakes up. Oh yeah, we're a real podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Isn't that crazy? Anyway, we're gonna take a short break, and when we come back, Tara's gonna coach the fuck out of me. All right, we'll be right back.
Yes.
I'm ready to be coached.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Chapter 4,
Chapter
waking up.
4, Waking Up. I feel like this is like always the hardest part of this book because when I first read it, I didn't even realize what was happening, but it basically is like she's numb through the next 4 months. And oh man, I can't wait for you to see the the movie scene that they do for it to kind of represent it.
Yeah.
It's good.
Okay.
Anyways, the chapter starts with this quote or this section. It says, "Time passes, even when it seems impossible. Even when each tick of the second hand aches like the pulse of blood behind a bruise. It passes unevenly, in strange lurches and dragging lulls, but pass it does, even for me." So that's like pretty sad.
Yeah. I'd say so.
And it starts off with Charlie and Bella in their house, and Charlie's pissed. And he says, "That's it, Bella, I'm sending you home." I looked up from my cereal, which I was pondering rather than eating, and stared at Charlie in shock. I hadn't been following the conversation. Actually, I hadn't even been aware that we were having a conversation, and I wasn't sure what he meant. "I am home," I mumbled. "I'm sending you to Renee, to Jacksonville," he clarified. Charlie watched with exasperation as I slowly grasped the meaning of the words. What did I do? I felt my face crumple. It was so unfair. My behavior had been above reproach for the past 4 months. After that first week, which neither of us mentioned, I hadn't missed a day of school or work. My grades were perfect. I never broke curfew, and I never went anywhere from which to break curfew in the first place. I only very rarely served leftovers. So she's like doing all the cooking and cleaning, like she's at home all the time,
Right, but
basically.
I think he's probably upset that she's not being herself,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak.
Charlie was scowling. "You didn't do anything. That's the problem. You never do anything." "You want me to get into trouble?" I wondered, my eyebrows pulling together in mystification. I made an effort to pay attention. It wasn't easy. I was so used to tuning everything out. My ears felt stopped up. Trouble would be better than this moping around all the time. That stung a bit. I'd been careful to avoid all forms of moroseness, moping included. "I am not moping around." "Wrong word," he grudgingly conceded. "Moping would be better. That would be doing something. You're just lifeless, Bella. I think that's the word I want." This accusation struck home. I sighed and tried to put some animation into my response. "I'm sorry, Dad." My apology sounded a little flat, even to me. I thought I'd been fooling him. Keeping Charlie from suffering was the whole point of all of this effort, anyways. How depressing to think that the effort had been wasted. So he's like basically going on and saying, like, "I don't want you to apologize." And she's like, "Well, I just don't know what to do. Like,
Right.
tell me what you want me to do." And he's like trying to explain to her that, unfortunately, she's not the first ever person to go through this type of thing. Like,
He's
because to
basically he's
her,
basically trying to say, Bella, you're being a little bit of a bitch. You need to man up a little bit.
yeah, I mean, to him, it's just any other relationship that he saw,
Right. He
right?
doesn't know that Eddie was a vampire, you know.
Yeah, it's like all
You
this.
think he's fine with me calling him Eddie?
I don't know.
You think anybody's ever called him Eddie?
I used to call him Eddie.
You used to call him Eddie?
Yeah.
What if I called him Ed?
I don't know. You could ask him.
I'll ask Robert Pattinson.
Yeah, that sounds great.
He loves talking about Twilight.
She's like, "Obviously, I know, like, I'm not the first person to, like, go through this, whatever. And Charlie kind of suggests that she needs, like, some help. He kind of has a heart to heart with her. He says, "When your mother left," he began frowning, "and took you with her." He inhaled deeply. "Well, that was a really bad time for me." "I know, Dad," I mumbled. "But I handled it," he pointed out. "Honey, you're not handling it." I waited and I hoped it would get better. He stared at me and I looked down quickly. "I think we both know it's not getting better." "I'm fine." He ignored me. "Well, maybe if you talk to someone about it, a professional." "You want me to see a shrink?" My voice was a shade sharper as I realized what he was getting at. Maybe it would help. And maybe it wouldn't help one little bit. And then she thinks, I didn't know much about psychoanalysis, but I was pretty sure that it didn't work unless the subject was relatively honest. Sure, I could tell the truth if I wanted to spend the rest of my life in a padded cell. So she's saying, like, she can't even tell the shrink
Right.
the truth, because they would be like, you're freaking nuts.
Right. They'd be like, vampires don't exist, dumbass.
And he's like, everything's like, it's beyond me. Like, maybe if you go, like, maybe your mother, like, and she, like, interrupts him and is like, I'll go out tonight if you want with Justin and Angela. And he's like, well, that's not what I want. I don't even think I can see you trying harder to pretend like you're fine. You know what I mean? Like, he's
Right.
trying to explain to her, like, everything just seems like you're trying too hard. And it hurts him to watch her do that. And she's like, well, I don't understand, because first you're mad that I'm not doing anything, and then you're saying you don't want me to go out. And he's just like, the bottom line is I just want you to be happy, but like you're not, and you're just like miserable. And I think he like explains to her that she thinks, or he thinks, she'll be better off just not in Forks at all. She's like, well, I'm not leaving. And he's like, I don't get why not. And she kind of tries to explain that it's her last semester of school ever, and it's just like would mess everything up.
Right.
And he's like, well, you're a good student, you'll figure it out. So it's just like a back and forth. And she's like, well, I don't want to crowd Mom and Phil. And he's like, well, your mom's been dying to have you back. And she's like, well, Florida's too hot. And he's like, well, we both know what's really going on here, and it's not good for you. It's been months, no calls, no letters, no contact. You can't keep waiting for him, is what he says.
Yikes. Yikes, Charlie. The hard truth pills to swallow.
Yeah.
On Father's Day.
Oh,
It's Father's Day today.
It's not Father's Day there.
Well, it is for us.
Okay, that's great. I glowered at him. The heat almost, but not quite, reached my face. It had been a long time since I'd blushed with any emotion. This whole subject was utterly forbidden, as he was well aware. I'm not waiting for anything. I don't expect anything, I said in a low monotone. Bella, he began. I have to go to school, I interrupted. So she is just like pissed.
Right.
And she goes to school, or she like gets ready for school, and she's like, well, I'm gonna make plans with Jessica, so maybe I won't even be home for dinner.
Got
See
him.
ya.
Yeah, good luck getting your own dinner, Charlie.
Yeah, exactly. He kind of relies on her, I feel like.
Right.
And then like she notes that in her like attempt to get away from Charlie, she's like one of the first ones at school, so she's just kind of um hanging out there. But she's been in this state where she tries to avoid free time at all costs,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously I think they make it pretty clear that she doesn't want to be alone with her own thoughts.
Right.
So she just starts working on calculus in the parking lot. And she said, before I could start thinking about Charlie's accusations, I pulled out my calculus book. I flipped it open to the section we would be starting today and tried to make sense of it. Reading math was even worse than listening to it, but I was getting better at it. In the last several months, I'd spent 10 times the amount of time on calculus than I'd ever spent on math before. As a result, I was managing to keep in the range of a low A. I knew Mr. Varner felt my improvement was all due to his superior teaching methods, and if that made him happy, I wasn't going to burst his bubble. I forced myself to keep it at it until the parking lot was full, and I ended up rushing to English. We were working on Animal Farm, which was an easy subject matter for me. I didn't mind communism. It was a welcome change from the exhausting romances that made up most of the curriculum. I settled into my seat, pleased by the distraction of the lecture. And then it just notes that time moves easily when she's in school, because she's like distracted.
Right, because she doesn't have to think about
Mhm.
anything other than school.
And they say, Bella, I recognized Mike's voice, and I knew what his next words would be before he said them. Are you working tomorrow? I looked up. He was leaning across the aisle with an anxious expression. Every Friday, he asked me the same question. Never mind that I hadn't taken so much as a sick day. Well, with one exception months ago. But he had no reason to look at me with such concern. I was a model employee. Tomorrow is Saturday, isn't it? I said. Having just had it pointed out to me by Charlie, I realized how lifeless my voice really sounded. Yeah, it is, he agreed. See you in Spanish. He waved once before turning his back. He didn't even bother walking me to class anymore. I trudged off to calculus with a grim expression. This was the class where I sat next to Jessica. It had been weeks, maybe months, since Jess had even greeted me when I passed her in the hall. I knew I had offended her with my antisocial behavior, and she was sulking. It wasn't going to be easy to talk to her now, especially to ask her to do me a favor. I weighed my options carefully as I loitered outside the classroom, procrastinating. I wasn't about to face Charlie again without some kind of social interaction to report. I knew I couldn't lie, though the thought of driving to Port Angeles and back alone, being sure my odometer reflected the correct mileage, just in case he checked, was very tempting. Jessica's mom was the biggest gossip in town, and Charlie was bound to run into Mrs. Stanley sooner rather than later. When he did, he would no doubt mention the trip. Lying about it was out. So she would just rather gone back and forth. So then she goes into calculus, and Jessica doesn't even look up to at her. So she was like, "Well, I guess I'm gonna have to talk to her after class." The teacher dismisses the class 5 minutes early, and she just is like, "Jess," and she twists in her seat to face me, eyeing me incredulously. "Are you talking to me, Bella?" "Of course." I widened my eyes to suggest innocence. "What, do you need help with calculus?" Her tone was a tad sour. "No," I shook my head. "Actually, I wanted to know if you would go to the movies with me tonight. I really need a girls' night out." The words sounded stiff, like badly delivered lines, and she looked suspicious. "Why are you asking me?" she asked, still unfriendly. "You're the first person I think of when I want girl time," I smiled, and I hoped the smile looked genuine. It was probably true. She was at least the first person I thought of when I wanted to avoid Charlie. It amounted to the same thing. So she's kind of being I feel like in her mind she's kind of a dick, you know?
She's definitely being she's definitely being a bitch.
She seemed mollified. "Well, I don't know. Do you have plans?" "No, I guess I can go with you. What do you want to see?" "I'm not sure what's playing," I hedged. This was the tricky part. I racked my brain for a clue. Hadn't I heard someone talk about a movie recently? Have I seen a poster? How about that one with the female president? She looked at me oddly. "Bella, that one's been out of the theater forever." "Oh," I frowned. "Is there anything else you'd like to see?" So she's trying to remember even details of
Right.
anything in the past few months. Jessica's natural bubbliness started to leak out in spite of herself as she thought out loud. "Well, there's that new romantic comedy that's getting great reviews. I want to see that one. And my dad just saw Dead End and he really liked it." And I grasped at the more promising title. "What's that one about?" "Zombies or something. He said it was the scariest thing he'd seen in years." "That sounds perfect. I'd rather deal with real zombies than watch a romance." So she's like, "Frick that. I want to see the zombie movie."
Right, right. Why would she want to go to a romance movie?
And then Jessica's just overall pretty surprised and asks if she wants her to pick her up from school, Bella up from school. And Bella's like, "Sure, wait, that sounds great." Jessica's still tentative about it, but they part ways basically. They go to their other classes.
Right.
And the rest of the day passes quickly for her because now she is focusing on something for once, planning on how the night's gonna go in her brain. She knows from experience that once she gets Jessica talking, she'll be able to get away with just getting a few responses in, but really only minimal interactions required. So she's still kind of being a bitch about it in the fact I don't think she means to. She's just not wanting to put any effort in and it makes her a bad friend kind of.
Well, it's almost like self-preservation. Like she's like, I
Yes.
have to do this, but I can't. So I'm
Yes.
just gonna do the bare minimum.
Mhm. It says, "The thick haze that blurred my days now was sometimes confusing. I was surprised when I found myself in my room, not even clearly remembering the drive home from school or even opening the front door. But that didn't matter. Losing track of time was the most I asked from life. I didn't fight the haze as I turned to my closet. The numbness was more essential in some place than in others. I barely registered what I was looking at as I slid the door aside to reveal the pile of rubbish on the left side of my closet under the clothes I never wore. My eyes did not stray toward the black garbage bag that held my present from last year's birthday. Did not see the shape of the stereo where it strained against the black plastic. I didn't think of the bloody mess my nails had been when I'd finished clawing it out of the dashboard. So remember Emmett gave her the radio?
Oh, she clawed it out.
Yeah, she clawed it out.
Yeah, that's not good.
I yanked the old purse I really rarely used off the nail it hung from and shoved the door shut. Oh, just then I heard a horn honking. I swiftly traded my wallet from my school bag into my purse. I was in a hurry, as if rushing would somehow make the night pass more quickly. So she gets into Jessica's car, and she's like, "Thanks for coming with me tonight." And Jessica's still like skeptical. She's like, "What brought this on?" And Bella says, "What brought what on? Why did you suddenly decide to go out?" It sounded like she changed her question halfway through. I shrugged. I just needed a change. I recognized the song on the radio then, and I quickly reached for the dial. "Do you mind?" I asked. "No, go ahead." So she changed the station from whatever song it was playing.
She doesn't say what song it was.
Mm-mm. It just says that she picks a new song, and Jessica's eyes squinted. "Since when do you listen to rap?" "I don't know," I said. "A while." "You like this?" she asked doubtfully. "Sure." It would be much too hard to interact with Jessica normally if I had to work to tune out the music too. So she's just like
She's just putting something on she doesn't care
avoiding
about.
music as a whole. And Jessica's like really weirded out by it. She's just like, okay. Bella asks, "So what's up with you and Mike these days?" "Well, you see him more than I do." The question hadn't started her talking like I hoped it would. "It's hard to talk at work," I mumbled. And then I tried again. "Have you been out with anyone lately?" "Not really. I go out with Connor sometimes. I went out with Eric 2 weeks ago." She rolled her eyes, and I sensed a long story. I clutched at the opportunity. "Eric Yorkie? Who asked who?" She groaned, getting more animated. "He did, of course. I couldn't think of a nice way to say no." And then like she's just like telling the tale of like going out
Of
with
Chess
Eric.
Club Eric.
Yeah. And she's like, Bella's glad because it's like a conversation that she can like launch into and like just like mumble some responses, right? Decide to go to the movie first and like get dinner maybe after. And basically they start the movie and it's like not zombie deaths right away and Bella's like not having it. And she's like, "Well, I thought we picked the zombie movie." And Jessica's like, "Well, I don't think that it's gotten to that part yet, like."
Like, fucking relax, Bella.
Yeah, because it just starts off with like a
Jesus.
couple like in love and blah blah blah. And so Bella's like wanting to distract herself, and so she goes to get popcorn, or she says she's gonna go get popcorn. She's like debating with herself to see if it's like she's like, is 99% of this movie gonna be romance or is it gonna be zombies? Like she's like, I don't know. So then she like decides that waiting out there for 10 minutes is enough, and then got the popcorn in the meantime. She just didn't want to go back in when it was like lovey-dovey scenes. And she gets back and Jessica's like, "You've missed everything. Almost everyone's a zombie now." Like so she just like, I don't know, she waited out there in the concessions just to miss like that one couple scenes.
Nice, Bella.
I don't know, it's just all very like awkwardness between them,
Yeah.
I feel like, right?
Yeah.
Or it says the rest of the movie was comprised of gruesome zombie attacks and endless screaming from the handful of people left alive, their numbers dwindling quickly. I would have thought that there was nothing in that to disturb me, but I felt uneasy and I wasn't sure why at first. It wasn't until almost the very end, as I watched a haggard zombie shambling after the last shrieking survivor, that I realized what the problem was. The scene kept cutting between the horrified face of the heroine and the dead, emotionless face of her pursuer, back and forth as it closed the distance, and I realized which one resembled me the most. I stood up. "Where are you going? There's like 2 minutes left," Jess hissed. "I need a drink," I muttered as I raced for the exit. I sat down on the bench outside the theater door and tried very hard not to think of the irony. But it was ironic, all things considered, that in the end I would end up as a zombie. I hadn't seen that one coming. Not that I hadn't dreamed of becoming a mythical monster once, just never a grotesque animated corpse. I shook my head to dislodge that train of thought, feeling panicky. I couldn't afford to think about what I'd once dreamed of. It was depressing to realize that I wasn't the heroine anymore, that my story was over. Jessica came out of the theater doors and hesitated, probably wondering where the best place was to search for me. Once she saw me, she looked relieved, but only for a moment. Then she looked irritated. Was the movie too scary for you? She wondered. Yeah, I agreed. I guess I'm just a coward. That's funny, she frowned. I didn't think you were scared. You were scared. I was screaming all the time, but I didn't hear you scream once, so I didn't even know why you left. I shrugged. Just scared. She relaxed a little. That was the scariest movie I've ever seen. I'll bet we're going to have nightmares tonight. No doubt about that, I said, trying to keep my voice normal. It was inevitable that I would have nightmares, but they wouldn't be about zombies. Her eyes flashed to my face and away. Maybe I hadn't succeeded with the normal voice. So then they move on to like going to a restaurant and going out to eat. And Jess is just like talking about different things. Like the male lead, the hot male lead in the movie. Or Jess asks where should they want to eat while she's there. She's talking about that male lead guy, and she's just like following Jessica, and she doesn't even realize that she's following and not like paying attention to her surroundings. She sees like that she's just like taking note of what's going on. We were on a short stretch of unlit sidewalk. The little shops lining the street were all locked up for the night, windows black. Half a block up ahead, the streetlights started up again, and I could see farther down the bright golden arches of the McDonald's she was heading for. Across the street, there was one business, open. The windows were covered from inside, and there were neon signs, advertisements for different brands of beer glowing in front of them. The biggest sign, in brilliant green, was the name of the bar, One-Eyed Pete's. I wondered if there was some pirate theme not visible from outside. The metal door was propped open. It was dimly lit inside, and the low murmur of many voices and the sound of ice clinking into glasses floated across the street. Lounging against the wall beside the door were 4 men. I glanced back at Jessica. Her eyes were fixed on the path ahead, and she moved briskly. Briskly. She didn't look frightened, just wary, trying not to attract any attention to herself. I paused without thinking, looking back at the 4 men with a strong sense of deja vu. So if you remember, they were in the same city when this happened to her last time.
Yep.
This was a different road, a different night, but the scene was so much the same. One of them was even short and dark. As I stopped and turned toward them, that one looked up in interest. I stared back at him, frozen on the sidewalk. Bella, Jess whispered, "What are you doing?" I shook my head, not sure myself. "I think I know them," I muttered. What was I doing? I should be running from this memory as fast as I could, blocking the image of the 4 lounging men from my mind, protecting myself with a numbness I couldn't function without. Why was I stepping, dazed, into the street? It seemed too coincidental that I should be in Port Angeles with Jessica on a dark street even. My eyes focused on the short one, trying to match the features to my memory of the man who had threatened me that night almost a year ago. I wondered if there was any way I could recognize the man, if it really was him. That particular part of that particular evening was just a blur. My body remembered it better than my mind did. The tension in my legs as I tried to decide whether to run or to stand my ground. The dryness in my throat as I struggled to build a decent scream. The tight stretch of skin across my knuckles as I clenched my hands into fists. The chills on the back of my neck when the dark-haired man called me sugar. There was an indefinite, implied kind of menace to these men that had nothing to do with that other night. It sprung from the fact that they were strangers, and it was dark here, and they outnumbered us. Nothing more specific than that. But it was enough that Jessica's voice cracked in panic as she called after me. "Bella, come on." I ignored her, walking slowly forward without ever making the conscious decision to move my feet. I didn't understand why, but the nebulous threat that the men presented drew me towards them. It was a senseless impulse. I hadn't felt any kind of impulse in so long that I followed it. Something unfamiliar beat through my veins. Adrenaline, I realized, long absent from my system, drumming my pulse faster and fighting against the lack of sensation. It was so strange. Why the adrenaline when there was no fear? It was almost as if it were an echo of the last time I'd stood like this, on a dark street in Port Angeles with strangers. I saw no reason for fear. I couldn't imagine anything in the world that was left to be afraid of, not physically at least. One of the few advantages of losing everything. So, like, she didn't even feel scared that she was in front of
Right.
all these men. I was halfway across the street when Jess caught up to me and grabbed my arm. Bella, you can't go into a bar, she hissed. I'm not going in, I said absently, shaking her hand off. I just want to see something. Are you crazy? She whispered. Are you suicidal? That question caught my attention and my eyes focused on her. No, I'm not. My voice sounded defensive, but it was true. I wasn't suicidal. Even in the beginning, when death unquestionably would have been a relief, I didn't consider it. I owed too much to Charlie, and I felt too responsible for Renee. I had to think of them. And I'd made a promise not to do anything stupid or reckless. For all those reasons, I was still breathing. Remembering that promise, I felt a twinge of guilt, but what I was doing right now didn't really count. It wasn't like I was taking a blade to my wrists. It's so wild. Like, this scene is so wild. Jess's eyes were round. Her mouth hung open. Her question about suicide had been rhetorical, I realized too late. So, like, she had answered seriously.
Right.
And she was, like, just saying, like, are you crazy, basically. Go eat, I encouraged her, waving her towards the fast food. I didn't like the way she looked at me. I'll catch up in a minute. I turned away from her back to the men who were watching us with amused eyes. Bella, stop this right now. My muscles locked into place, froze me where I stood, because it wasn't Jessica's voice that rebuked me now. It was a furious voice, a familiar voice, a beautiful voice, soft like velvet even though it was irate. It was his voice. I was exceptionally careful not to think his name, and I was surprised that the sound of it did not knock me to my knees, did not curl me onto the pavement in a torture of loss. But there was no pain, none at all. In the instant that I heard his voice, everything was clear, like my head had suddenly surfaced out of some dark pool. I was more aware of everything: sight, sound, the feel of the cold air that I hadn't noticed was blowing sharply against my face, the smells coming from the open bar door. I looked around myself in shock. Go back to Jessica, the lovely voice ordered, still angry. You promised. Nothing stupid. I was alone. Jessica stood a few feet from me, staring at me with frightened eyes. Against the wall, the strangers watched, confused, wondering what I was doing, standing there motionless in the middle of the street. I shook my head, trying to understand. I knew he wasn't there, and yet he felt improbably close, close for the first time since the end. The anger in his voice was concern, the same anger that was once very familiar, something I hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. Keep your promise. The voice was slipping away, as if the volume was being turned down on a radio. I began to suspect that I was having some kind of hallucination, triggered no doubt by the memory, the deja vu, the strange familiarity of the situation. I ran through the possibilities quickly in my head. Option 1, I was crazy. That was the layman's terms for people who heard voices in their heads. It's possible. Option 2, my subconscious mind was giving me what it thought I wanted. This was wish fulfillment, a momentary relief from pain by embracing the incorrect idea that he cared whether I lived or died, projecting what he would have said if A, he were here, and B, he would be in any way bothered by something bad happening to me. That's more probable. Or not more probable. She said it's probable. I could see no option 3, so I hoped it was the second option, and this was just my subconscious running amok rather than something I would need to be hospitalized for. My reaction was hardly sane, though. I was grateful. The sound of his voice was something that I'd feared I was losing, and so more than anything else, I felt overwhelming gratitude that my unconscious mind had held on to that sound better than my conscious one had. I was not allowed to think of him. That was something I tried to be very strict about. Of course I slipped, I was only human, but it was getting better, and so the pain was something I could avoid for days at a time now. The trade-off was the never-ending numbness. Between pain and nothing, I had chosen nothing. I waited for the pain now. I was not numb. My senses felt unusually intense after so many months of haze, but the normal pain held off. The only ache was the disappointment that his voice was fading. There was a second choice. The wise thing would be to run away from this potentially destructive and certainly mentally unstable development. It would be stupid to encourage hallucinations. But his voice was fading. I took another step forward, testing. Bella, turn around, he growled. I sighed in relief. The anger was what I wanted to hear. False, fabricated evidence that he cared. A dubious gift from my subconscious. Very few seconds had passed while I sorted this all out. It hadn't been that long, but she had been thinking about it.
Right.
My little audience watched, curious. It probably looked out like I was just dithering over whether or not I was going to approach them. How could they guess that I was standing there enjoying an unexpected moment of insanity? Hi, one of the men called, his tone both confident and a bit sarcastic. He was fair-skinned and fair-haired, and he stood with the assurance of someone who thought he was quite good-looking. I couldn't tell whether he was or not. I was prejudiced. The voice in my head answered with an exquisite snarl. I smiled, and the confident man seemed to take that as encouragement. Can I help you with something? You look lost, he grinned and winked. I stepped carefully over the gutter, running with water that was black in the darkness. No, I'm not lost. Now that I was closer and my eyes felt oddly unfocused, I analyzed the short, dark man's face. It was not familiar in any way. I suffered a curious sensation of disappointment that this was not the terrible man who had tried to hurt me almost a year ago. So she was like,
She's lost her damn mind.
she has lost her damn mind.
She is not okay.
The voice in my head was quiet now. The short man noticed my stare. Can I buy you a drink? He offered, nervous, seeming flattered that I had singled him out to stare at. I'm too young, I answered automatically. He was baffled, wondering why I had approached them. I felt compelled to explain. From across the street, you looked like someone I knew. Sorry, my mistake. The threat that had pulled me across the street had evaporated. These were not the dangerous men I had remembered. They were probably nice guys. Safe. I lost interest. That's okay, stay and hang out with us, the confident blonde said. Thanks, but I can't. Jessica was hesitating in the middle of the street, her eyes wide with outrage and betrayal. Oh, just a few minutes. She shook her head and turned to rejoin Jessica. So I'll keep explaining, but what do you feel about that?
Well, it's yeah, she's nuts. She's just lost her goddamn mind. She needs to go back home to her mom. She's lost it.
She has lost a little bit.
She wanted it to be the guys who tried to rape her and was disappointed when it wasn't.
I never thought of it that way, but
when
yeah.
I put it like that, it seems pretty strange, right?
Yeah. Anyways.
Is Stephanie Meyer okay?
I don't know.
Somebody needs to check on Stephanie Meyer.
Everyone check on her. Years later, down the road.
Just hit her up and go, hey, I just read chapter 4, New Moon. Are you okay?
Are you all right?
Are you all right?
Blink twice if you're okay.
I don't know. This is very strange to me.
So then she goes up to Jessica and is like, okay, let's go eat.
Jessica should run.
Right? The safe numb.
Jessica should just run for the hills.
The safe numb deadness did not come back, and I got more anxious with every minute that passed without its return. So she's like aware of things, and she's like, this is scary, right? And Jessica was like, what were you thinking? You don't know them. They could have been psychopaths. I shrugged. I just thought I knew the one guy. You are so odd, Bella Swan. I feel like I don't even know who you are. Sorry, I didn't know what else to say to that. So they walked to McDonald's in silence, and she tried to start a conversation a few times, when they ate, but Jessica was just not having it. She was pissed, obviously.
Rightfully so.
Yeah. And then they go back in the car to drive home, and they were obviously still struggling to hold a conversation, and she's still waiting for the numbness to return or the pain, because the pain must be coming, she thinks. I'd broken my own personal rules. Instead of shying away from the memories, I'd walked forward and greeted them. I'd heard his voice so clearly in my head. That was going to cost me. I was sure of it, especially if I couldn't reclaim the haze to protect myself. I felt too alert, and that frightened me. but relief was still the strongest emotion in my body, relief that came from the very core of my being. As much as I struggled not to think of him, I did not struggle to forget. I worried, late in the night, when the exhaustion of sleep deprivation broke down my defenses, that it was all slipping away, that my mind was a sieve, and I would someday not be able to remember the precise color of his eyes, the feel of his cool skin, or the texture of his voice. I could not think of them, but I must remember them. Because there was just one thing that I had to believe to be able to live. I had to know that he existed. That was all. Everything else I could endure, so long as I knew he existed. So that's why I was more trapped in Forks than I ever had been before. Why I'd fought with Charlie when he suggested a change. Honestly, it shouldn't matter. No one was ever coming back here. But if I were to go to Jacksonville, or somewhere else bright and unfamiliar, how could I be sure he was real? In a place where I could never imagine him, the conviction might fade, and that I could not live through. Forbidden to remember, terrified to forget. It was a hard line to walk. I was surprised when Jessica stopped the car in front of my house. "Thanks for going out with me, Jess," I said as I opened the door. "That was fun." I hoped the word fun was the appropriate word. "Sure," she muttered. "I'm sorry about after the movie." "Whatever, Bella." She glared out the windshield instead of looking at me. She seemed to be growing angrier rather than getting over it. "See you Monday?" "Yeah, bye." I gave up and shut the door, so she was like still pissed the whole time.
Yeah, way to
Of
go,
course.
Bella.
And then Charlie was waiting for her when she got there, and he's like, "Hey," she was like, "Hey, Dad," and he's like, "Well, where have you been?" And she was like, "Well, I went to a movie in Port Angeles with Jessica, like I told you in the morning." And he was like, "Hmm, well, okay."
Hmm.
And she said,
Also, I tried to meet up with some guys that I thought might have tried to rape me before.
"Yeah."
Just so you know, Dad.
She says, "Is that okay?" And he studied my face, his eyes widening as if he saw something unexpected. "Yeah, that's fine. Did you have fun?" "Sure," I said. "We watched zombies eat people. It was great." His eyes narrowed. "Night, Dad." And then she just like goes up to her room.
Mm-hmm.
And then she lays in her bed, resigned as the pain finally made its appearance. It was a crippling thing, this sensation that a huge hole had been punched through my chest, excising my most vital organs and leaving ragged, unhealed gashes around the edges that continued to throb and bleed despite the passage of time. Rationally, I knew my lungs must still be intact, yet I gasped for air, and my head spun like my efforts yielded me nothing. My heart must have been beating too, but I couldn't hear the sound of my pulse in my ears. My hands felt blue with cold. I curled inward, hugging my ribs to hold myself together. I scrambled for my numbness, my denial, but it evaded me. And yet, I found I could survive. I was alert. I felt the pain, the aching loss that radiated out from my chest, sending racking waves of hurt through my limbs and head. But it was manageable. I could live through it. I didn't feel like the pain had weakened over time, rather that I had grown strong enough to hear it. Whether it was that had happened tonight, whatever it was that had happened tonight, and whether it was the zombies, the adrenaline, or the hallucinations that were responsible, it had woken me up. For the first time in a long time, I didn't know what to expect in the morning. And that's the end of the chapter.
Wow. Um, I'm not really quite sure what to make of that chapter.
It's a
That
wild one.
that was wild, but at the same time, it was like, was it? You know, I don't know. Like I still don't understand. I guess I've never felt in a similar way to Bella in that way where I felt like putting myself in danger
Yeah,
was like a thing I wanted to do.
right.
That just I can't comprehend that. And she also put her friend in danger, which is pretty selfish of
Right.
her. I don't know. I don't know,
I don't
Bella.
think that I can relate to, like, I can relate to the pain that she's feeling. I feel like I've felt that pain before, but, like, I can't relate to that portion of it, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, it's just it's like fetishizing it. You know what I mean? Like your pain and your sadness and making it like woe is me kind of. You know what I mean? Like it's pretty. I know she'll turn it around, but it's pretty unlikable at this stage. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like don't know how I feel about Bella right now.
Yeah, this book is pretty hard. And
Some would say
overall,
cold and hard.
oh, yeah, they would say that.
Some would.
I think it's just like there's just so many different emotions in this book compared to others, you know?
Yeah. I'm just hoping, I hypothesized previously that because of the time skip, we'd be past this a little bit, but instead, this chapter was exactly what I would have expected if not for the time skip. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think they wanted to kind of, though, go back and explain what the past few months had been. You know? They're kind of trying to explain that she was in, like, this numbness, craziness.
For sure, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I thought
I could totally get what you mean, though.
I thought we were gonna be skipping past that a little bit.
No,
no. I guess not. Well, all right, everybody. Thank you for watching and
watching.
Listening. You can watch. There's a YouTube version.
You're right.
Watch.
You're right.
Tara, thank you so much for coaching me.
You're welcome.
And we will see you guys next week. I hope you enjoyed your CBT.
Bye.